UTSA football. So we're going to go ahead and play this second video that we had pre-recorded with JJ earlier in the week. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the local recruits here that have signed with UTSA. So I'm going to play that for us right now. And this campus visit segment, we're going to ask you some questions. We're going to start off with a local kid here. You know, Nahimi Harris, you know, out of Cornerstone. He went ahead and just stated over the weekend that he's going to commit to UTSA. So local kid staying here local and going to UTSA. And not only that, but he's one of the better cornerbacks that we have in the country. So we have great talent staying with UTSA. What do you got to say about that, JJ?
Another just terrific job by first-year head coach Jeff Traylor to really focus on the San Antonio recruiting scene. For years San Antonio has been under-recruited nationally, and recently you've seen a lot of the bigger schools come in and pick out talent. You know, the Oklahoma States, the Texas Techs, Texas A&M, of course, Texas. But there are in-between guys and big-time guys that are out there still to go play. And, you know, the commitment of Harris over the weekend was a big deal for the Roadrunners. It brings their 2021 recruiting class up to 18 verbal commits. And, you know, it's really a position of need for the Roadrunners. And you said it, he's one of the top guys in the country, definitely in the city. One of the smaller schools at San Antonio Christian or Cornerstone Christian, a tapped school, but a lot of talented players there. And it just kind of reinforces the idea that you don't have to leave home if you want to play at the next level. I mean, UTSA is a Division I football team, and they're putting together quite the resume of local guys, Joe, that are coming, either deciding to stay at UTSA or deciding to come back to San Antonio to UTSA when they've gone other places. It's like sometimes the saying goes, you go looking for love in all the wrong places, and UTSA's kind of experienced that. In this current, you know, recruiting class, UTSA has several local guys. Brandis safety, Jalen Rainey, one of the top safeties in San Antonio, is committed to UTSA. They also got Xavier Player from Blinn College, who used to play at Steele High School, signed and went to Oklahoma State, didn't play much, and went JUCO, and now he's back at San Antonio. So it's just a signal that to all the San Antonio recruits that UTSA is like a real option for playing Division I football.
Pettis, leaving us some insight into the local recruiting class here for UTSA. So Jonas, I know this is something that you had asked me about. What did you think about what JJ had to say about UTSA keeping it local?
I mean, you love to see it. That's the whole point here, right? Is to watch UTSA contend and show that they have the opportunities and the skill level of other schools. And I think that it's highlighted, you know, not just by the Namani Harris from Cornerstone committing on Sunday, but also Julian Williams coming back over from Houston. You know, he didn't really crack the receiving core over there, but you know, being able to have him added to this roster is just going to help. Josh Adkins coming, you know, the transfer I mentioned earlier, coming in from New Mexico State. Kids are wanting to come back because they see what UTSA is building here. And, you know, Coach Traylor, he did inherit a great program that was on the rise, but I think that when you also look at what he's bringing and ignore the fact that the school was Arkansas for a second, but just realize that he's bringing in, you know, a continuation of big conference experience, you know, to UTSA. I think that's attractive to a lot of these kids, and the opportunity to play at home, which is something I know, again, Namani Harris had mentioned, you know, to KSAT when they sat down with him, or when they were able to catch up with him. And it's just huge. You want to keep the talent here.
We want to keep the talent here, local in San Antonio, and it's refreshing to hear that UTSA has really stepped up their game and making that a viable option to some of the top league talent that we have here in the local San Antonio area. And when these kids are wanting to play at the next level for a Division One school, like JJ said, why not just stay home here and play for UTSA? What did you think about what he had to say about local recruiting, Orlando?
Oh man, I think it's exciting. I mean, not just I'm thinking of the fact that being in the press box and watching games, but locally as fans, I think it brings that excitement. I think it brings the community closer together. But it really is exciting, and you heard JJ say that like it's been, one of the things that UTSA has been good at is recruiting locally or like some of the bigger recruitments, and you know some of these safeties that they're getting are just guys in general just buying into it. Other high school athletes will see that. Local players or like in the surrounding areas like Wimberley or New Braunfels areas like that start seeing that some of these top players are staying locally, and we've seen some of these other schools that some of these players have turned down just to stay here and play with UTSA. So that's definitely exciting. Um, Definitely looking forward to that. But it's just a different feel. These guys here. Just knowing they don't have to go far. To play. Play here at home, and then hopefully, pursue their career. Professionally. But just playing here at home, knowing, just knowing that they're at home, playing basically right here in their backyard. At the dome, in front of the people, fans who have followed them throughout, when they were kids or had their high school careers. It's pretty exciting. So hopefully that momentum and culture continues for quite a bit longer here in the city.
Yeah, no doubt. So I'm just glad to hear that UTSA is doing its due diligence when it comes to keeping these local kids here local. And like I was telling JJ, I think one of the most attractive things to some of these local recruits here and staying with UTSA in San Antonio as well is being able to play in front of your family. How huge is that? If you know that you're going to play across the country and in this particular state or city, and your family's here in San Antonio, might have a hard time making that trek to go and see you play in person, and they might not only be there for maybe one or two games, maybe three at the most, but every time you're going to take that field, you can look over and you can probably see your parents or your family members cheering you on. Of course, we can't do that right now, but when the fans are allowed back into the stands, that's something special there that is going to stick with these kids. What do you have to say about that, Jonas?
Yeah, I mean, that helps, but it's also just the representing of your city and really taking pride in that. That fact right there. We had this conversation, I think, just 1 or 2 weeks ago about, could UTSA try to bring in Texas as a potential filler game to recoup some of that money that they lost by losing the LSU game this year? And yeah, and whether they have chances. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I was the lone person on the Hill saying, I think that UTSA can contend. And again, when you just look at the talent around here and where they've all gone, where our talent has gone before, and the fact that it highlights that they're starting to stay here and attend UTSA, and not just UTSA, but also University of the Incarnate Word, although we are, speaking on UTSA today. But, you do have two universities here in town, that it gives you that opportunity. I think that's something that also builds towards that is the hometown showdown that they did last season, and being able to have the opportunity where it's not just, you can share the pride that most of the roster is all from the same city. So whether you were rivals or teammates, and or just kept an eye on everybody else on Instagram and Twitter during the year before, or the previous seasons, that you all have that bond of having played San Antonio high school football. And I think that carries on as you build camaraderie and you build this program moving forward. That it's that kind of inclusiveness, that kind of unity that allows you to go out there and contend with a Baylor, right? and allows you to even look a little bit bigger to where you can get to the point that I believe, right, that UTSA could pull an upset on the Longhorns. And it's because that talent is staying here, even not even going up the road on of 35. If you can stay here, play D1 and get noticed. And I think that you just have to go back to Marcus Davenport a couple years ago to say, you know, first one round talent grows here in the soil of San Antonio, right? And you can take pride in that. And then what they're doing and what they're building, it just takes a couple more guys to buy in. And you see the pictures on Twitter now too, of just some of the athletes. They're taking that 2-1-0 pride that they're playing together at UTSA, and they're putting that on Twitter. That's getting noticed by your sophomores, your juniors, even down to your uncommitted seniors, down to your freshmen and eighth graders who start growing up in this city saying, you know what, I want to play for UTSA. I want to be a Roadrunner, rather than thinking I want to be a Bear or I want to be a Longhorn or something like that. You're able to keep them here, and that's only going to take this program further, but it's also just going to help, I think, the city environment for college football that we're really starting to see bud here in San Antonio.
Yeah, no doubt. So great things to look forward to as UTSA gets set to start their season coming up here shortly. So let's go ahead and transition into our favorite topic here, where we can have lengthy discussions, but we're short on time. We're going to go ahead and bring up our Spurs discussion. So this is something that Jonas brought to our attention. The Brooklyn Nets are wanting to go ahead and commandeer San Antonio Spurs head coach Greg Popovich, the rumor goes. We have Sean Marks, who is heading up the Brooklyn Nets over there and won 2 championships with Coach Pop here, and says that Coach Pop will take his phone call. And he wants to give him a pitch. I think out of respect, Coach Pop is just going to probably humor the guy. But realistically, Jonas, what do you think the chances are of San Antonio head coach Greg Popovich leaving the Spurs and going with the Brooklyn Nets?
I don't think it's very likely, but just like we talk about any free agent and stuff like that, if you don't do your due diligence and at least ask, you'll never, the answer is going to be for sure no. At least you can kind of, have that experience of sitting down, having a bottle of wine with Pop, and maybe seeing, if he's really happy here in San Antonio. I know he recently said, at the conclusion of the bubble, he was asked would he be back next year as the coach of the Spurs, and he said, why wouldn't I? He's still under contract here, and Marks knows that. And in an article with Nets Daily, who covers the Nets for Bleacher Report, they cited, Marks as having told the Fan up in New York, that he understands, Pop has a job. And obviously we all, he goes on to say, obviously we all know he's an amazing coach, to be quite frank, even a better leader. So he says, and this is a direct quote, I'll let Pop continue to coach for the Spurs. He owes it to them, and they owe it to him. He says, I'm sure he's quite happy there. But of course, the reason that these rumors come up is the Marks and Popovich connection, sure. But it comes more on the heel of the Spurs missing the playoffs. If the Spurs don't miss the playoffs, I think the basketball world would automatically be able to shoot this down, because there's this sense that Coach Popovich doesn't want to retire not in the midst of a title run or not coming off of a title. He wants to be able to have that send off is kind of the belief, and I don't think we're quite to that point yet. At 71, Pop is one of the older coaches in the NBA. I believe the oldest, if I'm not mistaken. But you can still see his impact on this court. You saw that in the NBA bubble. The camera caught him a lot of coaching up guys, and I talked about it before, either on here with the Project Spurs, for Spurs Takeover, about how Keldon, that was the big question coming into this whole youth movement, right? Can Coach Popovich reach the young guys? Can he coach this generation? And Keldon Johnson, goes out there, might have a mistake or two, picks up a foul, whatever. Coach Pop calls him over to the side while the other team's shooting free throws, and he goes out there and he makes a play on offense or defense, whatever needs done. And you don't have to look much further than his output at the bubble. I think he averaged something around 15 points on 22 minutes, and had to have been 5 or 6 rebounds per game. Without having those stats in front of me, but that's what you saw. You flat out saw that kind of stuff, and so I don't think that he's quite ready to leave what he's started to build here. But as the rumors go, there's a sexy roster once the Nets get healthy. They're currently, I don't think they're in the playoffs. They are in the playoffs. And they're still missing Kyrie and Kevin Durant. But the biggest question about those guys, and we've talked about this too across the city of San Antonio, is you always hear the praise from the big players about how great of a coach Popovich is.
UTSA has a first year.
But when it comes to free agency time, they never want to come here. And that could be about the market, or it could be they don't want to be driven by a coach like Coach Popovich, because he's going to ask you to fit into a certain system. So, when you look at kind of the Nets side of things, would those two stars even work within a Popovich system? That question, I think, is going to be no, and I think that's why you can just shoot these rumors down pretty much right away. But he will be interviewed, as I believe.
He will be interviewed. I'm thinking he's just going to do that as, like I said, he's just going to humor Sean Marks out of courtesy. It's going to be more of just a dinner, wine, catch up with an old friend kind of thing. But Orlando, what do you think the chances are? Likely or unlikely that San Antonio Spurs head coach Greg Popovich will be able to, I guess, sway to the Brooklyn Nets, should I say?
Yeah, I'm gonna say unlikely either, and I think for the most part, is what Jonas acknowledged is, his age. Just having to move all the way up, to New York or Brooklyn, and having to fit into another scheme. Doesn't mean they're gonna win a title within the first year or second year. Just having to do all that again. He will have a star-studded roster with Kyrie and Kevin Durant, who've also have championships recently, so they do got that experience. But I see it as unlikely. From what we've seen, though, in sports in general, it's I don't want to say like it wouldn't surprise me, because it would still be shocking. But I think those type of rumors you got to take a little serious sometimes. Maybe not this one in particular, but we've seen some crazy things happen. I mean, unless Pop wanted to do something crazy and prove that he could, go out and win a championship, kind of like a Tom Brady route. Not that Tom Brady has done it, but take another team to the championship. I guess to cement his legacy. Like, hey, I did it with the Spurs, but I was also able to do it with another team. To kind of prove it for himself. I guess that would be a route he would take. But 71, there's really no need to. Pop has done more than enough. First ballot Hall of Famer. He's done more than enough to cement himself to sit around and listen to these other guys and to prove himself even more. So for that reason, I'm going to say highly unlikely.
I'm going to have to agree with you as well. It's going to be highly unlikely that Coach Popovich will leave the San Antonio Spurs for the Brooklyn Nets. I believe that Coach Pop is going to stay here and finish his career here with the San Antonio Spurs, which brings us to the second part of our discussion, which Mr. Jonas Clark brought up. Jonas, you had mentioned something that was interesting to me, because I got raked over coals a few years ago when I had brought this topic up. And that is the dreaded conversation. Is it time for Coach Pop maybe to go ahead and consider retirement? What are your thoughts, Jonas?
I mean, he can consider it all he wants, but I think that this really the question blends with the conversation of the Brooklyn Nets almost perfectly, because we know that Well, I guess we don't know really if Pop has any desire to coach into his 80s, right? And I don't think this roster is 9 years away from a title. If you checked out my articles that I've written for Project Spurs before, especially the one around the puzzle piece and how they've been building this team up over the last 3 years, you're coming down to the final 3 years. And you fast forward this franchise just 3 seasons, and you've got an average roster age of right there around 26, 27, and that's just with the current guys, because you have so much youth. Keldon, who just turned 20, Luka, who just turned 20, even DeJounte, being the veteran of the group, is still only 24 years old. Like, wrap your mind around that one for a second. Derek White, 26. Bryn Forbes, 27. So they're going to be approaching their late 30s. So that should be that should be prime Derek White in 3 years. And you have him with a further developed Keldon Johnson and Luka Šimanić ready to come and enter the fold. This franchise is there, so I don't think that it's too much of a question to really look at that point and say, is it time for Pop to retire within the next year or so? Not even by his own request, but just for the fact that as you start to get ready for that next wave, do you want the Pop retirement to be hanging over the franchise? And which just brings us back to the whole, we're just kind of, with the end of the playoff run this year, we're starting to get out of the sappiness of the last 20 years. Right? It started with Timmy's retirement, and you're like, oh, it's the start of the end of an era, right? And then Manu retired, and then it's another step to the end of the Big Three era. Now there's one left, and then really quickly it was Tony was gone, and that's the end of the Big Three era. And there's and then it was the loss of their playoff streak that they built together, over 22 seasons. And then you have, okay, well, now it's Pop, right? Pop's that last one to drop. So is it going to be a question of that Pop should retire in the next year or two to allow this franchise to move on without him? Because I think he's proven he can still coach in this day and age. He can still reach these guys, and if he wants to, any of the other 30 teams across the NBA will gladly take him, right? I don't think that Brooklyn's the right situation for him. Memphis would be really interesting after they just fired Gentry up there. That would be really interesting with a young roster, some good size and Valanciunas that we've seen, and what he might be able to do with that team. But go ahead and let San Antonio move on, I think, is the real thing that to ask for his retirement for, because it's just going to bring us, we're always going to be held on. We're going to be held on to the last 20 years until Pop is gone.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get your take on this, Orlando. Is it time for Coach Pop to retire?
I think if, in the bubble, if you wouldn't have, maybe they would have, lost more games, maybe we would have looked at it differently. But I think if we wouldn't have had control, like I think what Jonas mentioned earlier, with Keldon Johnson and, with Pop being able to, to grasp and to reach out to these younger players and really make an impact, I think we would have seen the vice versa, where, maybe he didn't fit into today's NBA, or maybe with the younger players, he just wasn't able to reach out to them. I think then we start looking at that question a little bit more realistically, like, okay, maybe it is time for Pop to, to hang it up or make a move if he still wants to continue coaching, But from what we've seen in the bubble, the way that the team ran together, he still has an impact, with that roster. I'm going to say no, but I was leaning more towards yes prior to the bubble. But from what I've seen, I mean, there's still something there. There's still a spark. He's still reaching out to these guys. I don't know what's going to happen with some of these veterans like LA and Gay and some of these other guys, but even if some of those pieces are gone, you still got Patty Mills there. You still got some of these younger guys who still taking word of what Pop's doing and saying. So Pop still has a couple more seasons with the Spurs. Not too many, but he still has enough to still make an impact and prove that he's still one of the great coaches still.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he still sticks around for another year or so, and then at that point he'll contemplate his plight and see if he in fact still wants to go ahead and continue coaching, or does he want to just concentrate on Team USA, or does he just want to retire, enjoy life? He is getting up there in age, and at some point in time you just gotta kick back, and enjoy yourself. He deserves a for him to be able to kind of, rest, relax, enjoy retirement, sip on wine all day if he wants, or, go on a trip or something. He's earned it. He's worked hard enough. So it'd be nice to see him maybe at least win one more chip with the Spurs before he retires. But I think he'll more than likely give us his take in the next couple seasons here. So I can never get enough of Coach Pop. It's going to be a sad day, much like when we lost Timmy and Tony and Manu. Of course, Manu was my favorite, so that one hurt just a little bit more. But it's going to be a sad day in San Antonio when, in fact, he does decide to move on and hang it up,
Which is why he should do it in the next year or two. Because you don't want that rain cloud as you're getting ready for a championship.
True enough, Jonas. You don't. You want to go out, on top, kind of like David Robinson did. And, I think right now Coach Pop has already secured the Spurs for the future as far as, the level of talent that they're procuring and developing. And we've already gotten a little taste of that in the bubble. So I think we're going to be in good hands moving forward. And it's all going to be a product of what Coach Pop has procured over the course of his career here with San Antonio. So moving forward now, we're going to go ahead and hit our rapid road trip, which is UFC heavy laden, should I say. We are big fans of UFC fighting. I know Jonas watches it extensively. I do as well, and so does Orlando. Orlando even covers it he covers the MMA with an outlet here that's a subsidiary of Project Spurs. So we're going to go ahead and let Orlando let us know a little bit about what's going on in the world of UFC, because we have John Jones moving up to heavyweight.
Yeah, so John Jones made a huge announcement, and I think a lot of people saw this coming. But in the day and age of social media, it was nice to see John Jones make that announcement himself without the UFC stepping in. But went ahead and announced that he's vacating his title, and he's moving up to heavyweight, which I think at this point in his career was a great decision by John Jones, because lately you've seen him in a lot of close fights. He has been getting older. I don't think that has to do with any of his skills. I just think a lot of these fighters that he's fighting now, grew up watching John Jones, 2011, 2012, 13, and so they kind of know, John Jones maybe before they were even, partook in any type of fighting. So they kind of get a feeling of John Jones, who he was, what he likes to do, and I think that's why you've seen a lot of these closer fights. But just the heavyweight move in general, you got a guy who's used to fighting, Gustafsson or Cormier or Dominic Reyes, to fight, Machida. Some of these, some of the guys that he's fought, it's not like that in heavyweight. Yes, the heavyweights hit harder to where you're probably going to go. Somebody's going to fall asleep a lot faster, but there's hardly any heavyweights with the skill set that John Jones has, which makes it interesting. Aside from maybe a guy like Cain Velasquez or even Stipe Miocic or Cormier for the short time that he wasn't a heavyweight, which makes it interesting. So I know we were talking about this last time, but it's going to be interesting to see who he fights first. And I think the only two people that come to mind are Stipe Miocic for championship reasons, or Francis Ngannou, and obviously the winner fights Stipe. I know you guys had different takes on that as well, but I know those are the two big names, and I think only names that should be thrown around currently for John Jones' heavyweight debut fight.
Yeah, and we're also going to go ahead and mention here too, Jonas, we have our resident UFC fighter in Anthony. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm talking about somebody else. I'm talking about Anthony Johnson. I was thinking about Ivy. I'm just still thinking about that fight. Hopefully he has a better showing than he did in the first one. But Anthony Johnson returning. What do you all think about that? I know he's getting up there in age. You got any thoughts on that, Jonas?
Well, before we move on past John Jones, I wanted to ask you, Orlando, man. Um, I think that the motive behind the change of weight class is a little bit interesting because he's getting up there, though. Do you think that it might just be getting a little more difficult for him to cut weight to go back down to the light heavy, and that's why he's allowing himself to bulk up and just leave that mass on to fight heavyweight? Because like you said, he is one of the more agile even at the light heavyweight, and he'll maintain that and still be one of the smaller at the heavyweight. But you're going to maybe see fewer spinning back elbows and stuff like that, and more more strategic striking like we kind of saw in 252's main event. Do you think that the weight cutting could be an issue too?
Yeah, I think the weight cutting is definitely an issue. These
Especially without cocaine.
Yeah,
Hey, man, he
that-
needs something to get his edge, man. That's what he used.
Hey, there you go. Hey, if that's the case, throw Brock Lesnar in there, right? If you're gonna have a free for all like that. Yeah, no, I think the weight cutting it gets tougher, at that age. I think it really does. These camps were intense, they're grueling, but I don't think that was the main part. I just think the evolvement of the sport with some of these fighters, like this point talking about Coach Pop earlier, he already built that legacy. John Jones built that legacy for a decade already.
Right.
He has nothing left to prove in his division. So moving up to heavyweight at this point in his career, I just think he rejuvenates himself. There's still some big money fights there. I think the weight cutting is part of an issue, but John Jones was never really a fighter to begin with who had trouble making weight at all. I don't think he's ever missed weight for a fight or any of that stuff. But again, vacating the title, let these other guys fight for it. Let someone else step up. It's rare that we see a guy like John Jones or Anderson Silva who just come in and dominate a sport for 8 to 10 years, especially in MMA. That really doesn't happen. It really doesn't. And not only that, but to take care of themselves in that octagon, because a lot of these times, as much as we enjoy the sport, I mean, these people are humans too. So they're putting
Right.
a lot of damage on their brains and on their bodies in this short. Sport. I don't want to say short because he's still got guys like Machida and freaking
Retired
80-year-old
at
Ken
42
Shamrock
years old,
fighting.
yeah.
Yes, dude. I hate to see that, but I know it's hard to leave the sport.
Gotcha. Well, I think that it's interesting, to get back to Joe's question, about the return of Anthony Johnson, and he's been off for the last couple years, and actually his last fight was actually against Cormier.
Yeah, who's
So after Cormier retires, and Johnson lost his last fight by submission. So it's an interesting. If you want, I'm sure that he would say don't look further into this than just the fact that I'm coming back, but it's weird to come back into the UFC after the guy who beat you last retires.
Yeah. But I thought this was exciting news because I know he's getting up there in age 36 or something. But if you watched Anthony Johnson fight, oh my God, all his fights were basically ending out in knockout, literally like knockout. I think Daniel Cormier was able to choke him out twice or get him in submission. But now if you want to see like a straight up bar fight or somebody just go in there and metaphorically kill the other man, Anthony Johnson was a fight you're always turning into because kind of like a Derek Lewis. Derek Lewis is not going to sit there and wrestle you and roll around on the mat with you. He's going to knock your head off, and that's what Anthony Johnson provided. But when you threw in a guy like Cormier, who's pretty well-rounded in grappling and wrestling, he was always going to give somebody a guy like Anthony Johnson trouble. But I know he kind of got bored with the sport too. He never really took a lot of damage. A lot of his wins were ending early in the first or second round by knockout. But I think this is exciting. Again, it's a little different though because a lot of these guys are like well-rounded. A lot of these guys won't just stand there and take a chance of risk of being knocked out with a guy like Anthony Johnson. So it's going to be interesting to see, but it's an exciting move. I don't know if he gets a top-ranked fight right away, but it's still going to be like really interesting to see. And I will say though, before we move on to the next one, it wouldn't surprise me either at his age, if Anthony Johnson, if he gets a win or two, or depending what happens, and he moves up to heavyweight, because he's also a guy who has a big body, which was kind of surprising to see him make weight at 205, because his natural weight, he sits around 220, 225 realistically before cutting weight to 205. So
Right.
seeing a guy at 36 going on 37, moving up to heavyweight would not be shocking either.
Okay.
Yeah, not
so
at all.
lose Cormier, and it might just get refueled right there with John Jones and potentially Anthony Johnson, right there at heavyweight. That's cool.
Yeah, so we're also going to go ahead and talk now about UFC 252 and how it disappointed one Mr. Jonas Clark. He wasn't a fan of UFC 252. I enjoyed it just because I enjoy fighting, and I've grown up with watching mixed martial arts and watching boxing. So when a lot of people think that these fights are boring or they didn't like the way that the outcome was, I look for the intangibles by looking at the actual fighters themselves, and I look at their techniques. I look to see what exactly won them this particular fight. So while others think it's boring, I can't get enough of it because that's just me. But tell me why you were disappointed in UFC 252, specifically with the Miocic and the Cormier match.
Dude, I can appreciate the technicality as much as the next guy, but that's not what this was supposed to be. You have two previous matches decided by knockout or by TKO. They build this up. It's the trilogy. It's Cormier's last fight. It's Stipe defending. And what you got, two guys who just know each other because they've been in the ring in the octagons against each other, with it all on the line before. So I really wanted to see, what I was really going into this for was I wanted to see this one decided by the gloves, man. I wanted or by submission or something. I didn't want this to go all 5 rounds and then we have to go by decision. The high point of that whole fight to me was the final seconds of round 2 when Stipe finally knocked Cormier back and almost put him out. Cormier even had to ask his cornerman if he was out. He's like, was I out? Was I out? And they're like, nah, bro, you got rocked for a second. You're good. But he had a chance there. But, there wasn't, we didn't see a whole lot of the wrestling. So there wasn't even the ground game that you really thought you could have gotten from Cormier too. He showed his age and you kind of saw why he was retiring. It was a good loss for him because he showed he could still go 5 rounds with the current, and the reigning champ then. And that's something you can hang your hat on at the end of the day. If you don't get the win, you can at least say I went the distance and they had to make a decision. But man, I would have loved to have seen Stipe just own that title, then take it, man. That's just my thoughts. My Cleveland boy won it all. So I'm happy with the result, even with the nasty eye poke. There was an eye poke that went both ways, but yeah, Stipe's on Cormier was a little bit more uglier. It almost looked like he went knuckle deep into his eye socket, man. That was brutal. And DC had to fight the next round and a half with his eyes closed, with one of his eyes closed. And I thought he was gonna get knocked out from that side because he was taking some serious right side hits. But no, man, I was disappointed. But we can move on with the heavyweight world now. My guy John Jones is back in this mix, and Orlando, if you're right, man, then I'm gonna have to decide who I'm picking for UFC 256 or whatever down the road when we finally get to, John Jones and Stipe maybe fighting for that title. My Cleveland boy versus my favorite fighter that I've been watching for years, Johnny Bones. That's gonna be a rough one for me.
Yeah, we're running up against the clock here. We got 2 minutes, so real quick, before we go ahead and end this episode of the Friday Night Takeover, Orlando, do you have an update for us on the O'Malley and Vera fight? Because, O'Malley went down. He was undefeated, and Vera I think he just got him with the kick, and you guys were saying it might have been the O'Malley kick that really did him in. So you got any updates on him?
I just know he's set up for another MRI coming up. I think tomorrow actually. I saw that posted on I think MMA Junkie posted that he set up for an MRI. But as far as that, I don't want to use that as an excuse for O'Malley. I think I know I told y'all off the live stream that for All Access MMA that is part with in part with Project Spurs. I was the only rider to pick Cheeto Vera to take out O'Malley, only because I think he's a more complete fighter. But I hate that. I see this. From what I've seen, MMA Twitter want to make O'Malley as kind of the next McGregor in a way. Like, realistically, I just don't think the kid is that. I like O'Malley, nothing against that, but it is what it is, man. He could have. He decided to go down. It is what it is. So. Other than an MRI, no update, but I don't think he should be getting a rematch.
Yeah, I would like to see that match again, but I got to say, if they're in a fight again, I got to give the edge to Vera, because Vera already knows he can get to him. Even with O'Malley's unorthodox style, it didn't bother Vera at all. He was engaged, he was locked in, and he knew exactly what he was going to do. So I got to give the edge to Vera if they in fact do have a rematch. But we are up against the clock here. We only probably got a couple seconds before we hit the magic number 8. Jonas, you got anything in closing here about the Malley and Vera fight?
No, I mean, I still think he broke his foot, but obviously we'll find out about the MRI, when that comes out. But 253, I'm ready for it. I think it's September 26th. Let's go.
Here we go. So we're ready for it. With that said, for Jonas Clark and Orlando Torres, I'm Joe Garcia.